So thank you so much for organizing this for us, Ryan. We are very excited to start our presentation. We are going to try to be as interactive as possible. We talked about sending all of you out there in cyberspace a signature drink to start the webinar presentation, but we couldn't make that work, so we're just going to have to engage everyone through our hopefully creative ideas. So first, we'd like to start off by having you put on your thinking caps. We want you to think about an event that you've recently attended. And I want you to think about what went well and what didn't go so well. And Stephanie is going to tell us a little story.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. So to start off this webinar, we want you to put on your imagination hats and imagine that you have been hired. I think I have to hit this so that we approve, Ryan. Yeah. Just move our slides, sorry. So we want you to imagine that you have been hired to plan a large banquet event for a client. It's your job to understand everything about it, from the planning to the execution of the event. However, now we want you to imagine that a few little things happen. The invitation that goes out says Friday, February 10th, but February 10th happens to be a Saturday. As people arrive, the registration table is next to the code check and everything becomes bottlenecked upon entry. The entrance to the event is not suitable for those who need a handicapped entrance. The name tags have names with misspellings on them. There's confusion about the place cards as you approach the table, and people begin swapping with each other and trying to sit next to their friends. We would probably do that.
Yes.
And inside the ballroom, the tables are set up and are meant for 8 people at a table, but you notice that 10 people are jammed into each of the round tables. Also, the lights in the ballroom are so dim that the guests are having trouble reading their menus.
They're whipping out their cell phone, trying to read the menu.
And trying to read the program that will be occurring. And then as guests sit at the table and they're trying to decide what they want to eat, this odd smell of fish wafts into the room, and it's not very pleasant. The actual program starts later than it's supposed to, and the guests at the head table are ready to speak, but they're not properly introduced. And you notice that there's some uneasy nonverbal communication going on. Also, those guests at the head table have one microphone that they have to pass along. And you know when that happens, it gets the reverberation, you hear the banging of the microphone, so that doesn't go too smoothly. The audiovisual slideshow that is to be presented is not in sync with what the speaker is saying. The program drags on too long, and it does not seem well polished. All of these things, this very unfortunate planning, affects the overall perception of any given event, and it's negative. This is just one example of how event planning can go horribly wrong.
So if you think this is a disaster, it is. So when my mentor, Janie Hardin-Fritz, came to me and said, we need to plan a convention for around 1,000 people for the Eastern Communication Association conference, I said, sure, we can do that. We can plan a party. And I think that's what happens a lot of time with event planning. People say, oh, yes, I planned a party. I can do this. Well, after I said yes, I then started to think, this is going to be a huge project. How are we going to make this work? So I contacted my expert event planners and said, help me, we need to figure this out. When we thought about the 2010 Eastern Communication Conference in Baltimore, we said, how are we going to make this work? There was a perception of the city at the time that was negative. The Wire was a popular TV show that talked about the drug culture in Baltimore. Previous convention in Baltimore didn't go too well because there was an incident. So the people coming, their perception was not good. So we thought to ourselves, how are we going to make this work? Well, we did a lot of things right, and we did a lot of things that we learned from. So we talked about planning this convention as a learning opportunity. All the students that you see in the pictures, well, in the darker green shirts, they did this for service. There was no class available at the time, and we were planning by the seats of our pants, trying to make it work. So when we were done with the convention, we said, this is something that we need to teach here at Stevenson. Now, Chip's going to talk a little bit about how did we go about getting an event planning class into our curriculum.
Okay. So after the ECA convention in Baltimore in 2010, upon which we depended on our students enormously, and they were very willing to help us out. But we did understand that because they had never really learned good practices in event planning, they were sort of learning as we were at every event, at every instance that came up. So by the time we were ready to develop a course, we knew what the students needed, since we had worked with them for 4 or 5 days during the conference, as well as on several large-scale and small-scale events around the university. We knew what they could intuitively do well, but we had also seen the holes where their learning could be improved. We knew that there were some skills we would like to develop, and that's why we wanted a course in event planning. We had a little convincing to do as we moved the course planning through the academic channels, but in the end, it all worked out. When we thought about teaching a course in event planning, we knew that we needed the students to learn not just how to execute an event, but all the planning that goes into it, including how to manage a budget, how to market, how to choose the proper site, how to look at rooms and determine if they're the right kind of rooms, how to read a contract and what the affiliated costs are with a contract. We wanted to teach communication strategies as well that are connected to event planning, such as being able to target specific media and to understand what audiences need. So by the time the students finished the course, we knew what the objectives were, and these are what we came up with, these objectives. And I'm just going to read them because we were pretty careful about writing them, and to this day, 5, 6 years later, the course objectives are still in place. Understand what makes events successful for various clients and audiences. Connect communication theories with the practice of event planning. Create event plans that consider venue, budget, communication, timelines, and logistics. We wanted the students to learn how to communicate event plans clearly to their clients and to their peers. And we wanted them to learn the process required for evaluating an event. These were the objectives that we wrote for the course when it was finally approved by the Faculty Council here at Stevenson. After the course was passed and were ready to launch it, we knew we had to pick a textbook. There were a lot of choices in our textbook selection. Most were kind of checklist types, how-to books, what to do when this happens, but none of them really examined the why of why we do what we do. The adjuncts that we had teaching the course, who were all event planners either in their own companies or for larger corporations, for the first couple of years, we relied on their background in event planning and their use of the textbook and feedback to us. We regularly assessed their satisfaction with the book, but nothing that any of the books did what they wanted it to do or what we wanted it to do. So at that point, Leeanne decided that we would write our own book. And that's the origin of the text. We have used it with students for several years now and are pleased with how it works. Leeanne, who taught one of those early sections of the course, will speak about what's actually in the text.
So when we started to work and think about what do we want exactly in the text, we knew that we wanted communication to be the center. So you can see in our diagram with communication in the middle, that was the heart. We were communication professors, and we knew that we wanted to integrate all of those communication skills. As you heard at the very beginning from Stephanie's little story, a lot of those elements dealt with communication, right? Whether it was the nonverbal smell of the fish, whether it was the bottleneck where people are rolling their eyes, the people coming together and switching their name tags, all of that has to do with ways in which we communicate to an audience about an event. But we also knew that there was so much other research out there, right? We look in most of the books, they all talk about a vision, having that vision. What do you see the events? What type of research are you going to do for the events? The planning, where you come up with all of those checklists that are in all the other books that says do this, then actually taking those checklists and implementing them for your particular event. And then after it's all said and done, really evaluating. And that's what we did after we planned our first event. We evaluated what worked and what didn't work. And when we taught the course, we talked about, these are some things that we know we could do better next time. So some things that are also in the book, we highlighted some areas. We talk a little bit about listening, nonverbals, interpersonal. In a minute, Chip's going to talk a little bit about the connection between interpersonal and the hospitality industry that we think is so connected. The issue of creativity, leadership, that fun chapter that we all love, that we made Chip write on the budget, right? We don't really enjoy talking about a budget, but we know it's essential, it's needed, and students need to know that. A lot of times students or even professionals will say, we'll talk money later. No, we need to talk money right away. Conflict, staging an event, promoting the event, and in our last chapter, we talk about what happens if you want to start your own event planning company. So the issue of being an entrepreneur and being able to go out and engage an audience and be your own boss. So that's some of the highlights of the chapters in the book. We also wanted to make sure that we weren't just the only ones speaking. We had, as Chip mentioned, a lot of adjuncts coming in to teach the course, and they were all professionals in the industry. And they would tell us great stories, and we said, this is what makes a class, right? We're all storytelling human beings, as Walter Fisher says, and we wanted to tell stories. So we went out and we got faculty members, professionals, people who are planning events, and we had them start each chapter with a case study. And today you're going to hear 3 different case studies from us. We're each going to talk about one, and I'm going to talk about the first one. So in chapter 9, when we deal with negotiations and contracts, the ethical side of event planning, we asked Lynn Turner, who was planning the National Communication Association conference in San Diego, to talk to us a little bit about what was her experience like. If you've ever been to NCA, you know that it's a very large convention. It takes lots of moving parts to make it work. Well, Lynn Turner, who is a professor at Marquette University, she's planning this convention, and 10 months before the convention, there is a workers' strike at the hotel that we are going to. So she has to figure out, what are we going to do? There's a huge labor dispute. People are not happy. Her audience is not happy because they are communication professionals who are saying, we support the worker, not the hotel, and now you want us to stay at this hotel, right? And she did a phenomenal job saying, yes, we have a contract with them. Yes, we need to uphold that contract, but what else can we do to help our audience understand what is needed in this particular situation? We can't just cancel a conference that we've been planning for 4 years now. That contract was negotiated before this ever happened, okay? So she reached out on the web, on CritNet, on various tools that communication professors use, and said, how can we make this better? And she really listened to her audience. And she really made the convention a success because she was able to sort of navigate those ethical boundaries that occur sometimes when you plan a convention. So Chip is now going to talk about the connection that we see moving forward to the hospitality industry.
Okay, so the next slide sort of demonstrates what we have come up with as far as how these 3, you would think, separate sets of skills really do impact each other. So as we continue our work on the course and begin to plan the 2nd edition of the textbook, we are really looking at the connection among all these 3 sets of skills. We want the new addition to engage the hospitality industry as much as we can, since actually that's where an event planning course often sits academically within the realm of hospitality management. We're lucky that we have it in our major, business communication, but we are one of the few that actually have an event planning class in a communication major. What we found after doing some research is that there is a strong interrelationship among these three sets of skills. The communication skills that students rely on in these areas, their interpersonal skills, their ability to listen, their ability to speak in public, how to understand and translate nonverbals from others, how to write clearly, how to build rapport and interact and engage with others. Those are strong communication skills that both of the other two areas actually depend upon. In event planning, Leeanne talked and Steph talked about some of those skills, having a vision, how to research, how to plan, how to manage details and make decisions, and how to negotiate and assess what is happening around you. Those skills, again, are really essential, and we would like to see them developed as we continue to look into hospitality management, which the areas that we're looking at include providing a total guest experience, understanding human resources, human capital, developing a business plan, which would include reading and writing bids and proposals, coordinating decision-making among various constituents, and understanding other people's management styles, understanding your own management style, and how to supervise others. We found that most of these skills cross over into the other two domains, as you can imagine. So Stephanie is going to talk a little bit more about a couple of these skills.
The case study that I'm going to discuss is in Chapter 6, the Creativity chapter. And it starts with a gentleman that I've known for many years from my days working in professional baseball with Major League Baseball with the Baltimore Orioles. So Charles and I go way back, and he was kind enough to write this case study for us. He left the Orioles, went to San Diego Padres, Los Angeles Dodgers, Boston, and this case study is one that is from Boston. And it happened the day, so we pick up this case study the day of the Boston Marathon bombing. The news spread that day pretty quickly about the bombing, and the players were at the game. The game had finished in Boston. They were boarding the plane to go to Cleveland. And as they were going to Cleveland, they started hearing the news of what was happening. And the players rarely went to dinner together, but on that particular night, they all decided to go to dinner together. And while they were sitting there having dinner, they bonded. And one of the players, Will Middlebrooks, tweeted a message of sympathy to all those in Boston. And the hashtag read, #BostonStrong. And it stuck, as you know, from Twitter. And so that took off, and when the team returned back to town, the president of the Red Sox charged the management team with the idea of thinking about what they could do charitably. And that idea grew while Charles was sitting in the meeting and wrote the letter B, as you can see in that picture you have on your screen, wrote the letter B and then strong. And that became their charity, and they ended up donating over $2 million to the One Fund in Boston. They were ideas people, and they like to say yes to things. So another idea that came from this incident was that one of the management members said, we always wear Red Sox on the jersey. What if it said Boston? Like we're, showing our solidarity with the city. And so they did. They changed their jerseys to read Boston. After the bombers were caught, the team knew that it had to do some kind of an on-field ceremony to recognize what had happened in Boston, to bring everybody together and show the resilience of the city. So the team picked Big Papi. I'm not sure if some of you know who he is, but he's a beloved member of the Red Sox. His real name is David Ortiz, and they chose him as the speaker. And he was very happy to do it. They brought him down on field. They rehearsed with him. He was scripted. However, a funny little thing happened when they were actually executing that night, and that is that Big Papi decided to go off script. And he said, "This is our effing city, and nobody's going to dictate our freedom. Stay strong." Well, while it was a little shocking that he went off script and used profanity, the fans loved it. They loved it. They cheered. They went crazy. And that emotional connection with the team and the fans was really something. And it happened all through this event. Additionally, another crazy thing happened, and that is that the team started playing their game, and Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond is the 7th inning stretch song. And Neil Diamond phoned in and said, "I'm going to make it there by the 7th inning stretch. I'm flying in." He made it to the ballpark, and he sang live the 7th inning stretch. So 2 of the many skills from this particular case study that we see are having a vision, knowing how to execute something, and then also being flexible. And flexibility leads me into this one other very short case study. It's not even a case study, it's my case study that happened to me. And one of the funny things we all always say is that once an event planner, always an event planner. You always wear your event planning hat. And I happen to be fortunate enough to go to Fashion Week in New York City. My friend worked there. She invited me to come. I got a media pass. I got to go backstage and really see how the event functioned. And I wasn't working. I was just there as a guest, but I had my event planning hat on, and I went to a fashion show that was not in the main tent at Bryant Park, but rather down in Soho. And when I was there, I noticed that it was a lightly attended fashion show. There weren't a lot of people sitting in the front rows. The fashion show was about to start, and yet when the media cameras were starting to run, I was afraid that it was going to look empty, that there were no people sitting next to the catwalk. So I started panicking, turned to my husband and said, "Oh my gosh, this isn't going to look good on camera." And he said, "Well, why are you worried about this? This isn't your event." I said, "I know, but I'm worried for the people." And so into the room came a woman with a headset, and she moved everybody into the first 2 rows, and the fashion show started. So we all have those things that happen to us with event planning, but the important thing is flexibility. And Leeanne is now going to talk a little bit
So
more.
you can see a little bit from all of the skills that are on this chart. We talk a little bit, Steph talked about flexibility. We talked about the idea of, the passion. Big Papi was passionate when he got out there, and he got the crowd excited. If you look at our next slide, you can see that this activity is one activity that we do in the book. We want the students and whomever to be able to engage some questions about themselves. So when we're thinking about all of these different skills, we want them to figure out, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? So this is an activity that I did in the classroom where I passed this out, and I have all of the students rank themselves. And they all rank themselves. And then I say, okay, now I want you to take this somewhere. I want you to take it to your boss. I want you to take it home and give it to someone that knows you well, and I want them to rank you too. And then we're going to come back to class, and we're going to compare, okay? Because what happens a lot of times is, as my colleagues know, I will say, "I'm a very organized person. I know exactly what I'm doing." And Chip will say to me, "Oh yes, organized chaos," right? All of my stuff makes sense to me. It doesn't necessarily make sense to anyone else. Now, hopefully in the classroom, I'm a little bit more organized and I know what's going on. But we all have that idea of our perception, right? What I think versus what someone else thinks. And that has a lot to do with events, because how I see things might not always be how my client sees something. So we spend a good time talking about perception. And now Chip is going to talk to us a little bit about how that perception can really impact an event through her case study.
We have seen, the next slide will show you a couple photos, but we have seen with the students that misperceptions can really derail an event. And so one of the chapters, chapter 8, the budget chapter, that no one wants to read, so we really had to make it interesting. We talk a little bit in the case study about misperceptions and how it's very important at the start to be on the same page as the client and their budget. It's important to start with a clear understanding of what the budget actually is, what it has to cover, how much room there is for movement within it, and what the client expects that budget to do. And those sometimes are difficult conversations to have when you have a preconceived notion about who the client is. When careful attention isn't paid to the client's finances, it can put the event planner into a difficult position. And we have found that students are often unprepared to deal with what this chapter presents. In one example, excuse me, we write about a very big name client who wanted to plan a fun outdoorsy fall event for some of the thousands of employees that they would bring to this event at a local country club. Problems began when the event planners made some presumptions about what this event could be that ended up not matching what the client wanted to do. At each step along the way, the event planners found that they had to scale back what they presented because they had never really had a clear talk about what the budget was supposed to cover. They saw the client's name and concluded that lots of money would become available when it was needed. The event planning team had to scramble to find ways to make the event a success. And it's never good to get the client really excited about your proposal and then find out that it's just not possible to do that given the financial constraints. At the end, however, the situation led to some really creative activities that didn't cost a lot, but still met the expectations of the client. It's not the easiest way to plan, and we don't recommend it. The event team really learned a lot from this. Leeanne, what's the next thing we want to do?
So I think each of us gave a case study where we talked about something that we found interesting in the book. Now what I'd like to do is I would like you out there in cyberspace to think about questions that you have, start sending them into Ryan. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the tips that we find interesting in the book. And these tips come from a whole bunch of different people. And Stephanie's going to start off explaining one of the tips that she found interesting in the book.
There we go, the next slide. So the tip that I chose is keep your stakeholders in mind when planning your strategic messages. Do your research, know who they are, what they like, and how to incorporate them into the event. And this is also from a former colleague of mine, Julie Wagner, when we worked together at the Orioles. And she also, yes, correct, she also taught our event planning course for a year or so, right? So Julie's tip is great, and it brings me back to being hot outside with a walkie-talkie in 1993. Yes, a walkie-talkie. And during that 1993 All-Star game when Baltimore hosted it, we had to figure out how could we engage all of our stakeholders, everybody, not just the people who are going to be sitting in the ballpark the night of the All-Star game or sitting in the ballpark for the home run hitting contest. We had to think about all of Baltimore because people were excited. It was exciting to have the All-Star game here. And so one of the things we did was we knew there was the game, there was the home run hitting. They also, Major League Baseball hosts Fan Fest, which you can go to, and that's open to anyone. But we also wanted one more thing that we could say was ours in addition to a parade and all this other stuff we did. But we created this thing called Street Fest. And it was right outside, right across the street from the ballpark in this empty lot that we had. And we set up games and vendors and food. And it was great because people who came downtown wanted to be a part of it, even if they couldn't come to the game. We even went so far as to give cab drivers, Orioles hats. And they were greeting people at the airport. Oh, great to see you. Where can I take you? And so all of that kind of came together. And we worked with the Baltimore Office of Promotion and the Arts, great partner of ours with our students, go and work there and intern there. And they were wonderful, helped us, rope off the streets and get things moving. All of it was really, really great, but it required everybody to get together. We had to think about all of our stakeholders. And now they go so far as to do this type of thing at the Super Bowl. You go to the Super Bowl, it's a week long of activities. Even if you're not going to the game, you can still go to that city and have a really great time.
Because you would know, because you go.
So that's another example. And then I was thinking about Fashion Week and how much Fashion Week, they do a great job of incorporating people, handing things out outside the tent. Stores are doing things, there's specials on restaurant deals. I mean, really think about who your stakeholders are and who is going to be wanting to feel a part of the event.
Good. So the tip that I found probably most helpful came from Roz Healy. It's the second tip on your screen. Roz Healy is she is the director, the chief of staff of BOPA, of the Baltimore Office of Promotion in the Arts, and they are a city agency that runs a couple dozen major events every year, including the Baltimore Book Fest, Light City, and Artscape in the summer, and these are major events over several days. So I feel like when she gives advice, it's really good advice. So she says, learn from your mistakes and try to get feedback, not just from your team, but from as many sources you can, as close to the event as you can, and then make changes based upon what they have told you. So as an example, our students in the past, pretty traditionally, have worked with our alumni office here at the university on an event called Breakfast with Santa. It's a good event. It's not terribly expensive. It includes breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, bagels, pretty standard fare, includes fruit salad as well. After the event, the very first year, the planners noticed that there was a lot of food left on the plates, especially the plates of the children. And photos of different tables showed that not a lot of children were actually eating breakfast. It was exciting to see Santa and play the games and have fun, but the breakfast wasn't such a big part of the kids' event. The assessments one year from the parents who had attended noted that the food service provider had included whole grapes in the salad and larger chunks of melons, and those kind of things are too hard or even dangerous for little children to eat, and that there needed to be more finger food for the kids. Well, the food service provider who works for the university was not used to providing food for children, and no one in the alumni office had children. And so it didn't even occur to them until they got the feedback that changes need to be made. They did some brainstorming from the food people, friends of alumni, and some parents, and the next year they offered little French toast strips and mini waffles, food that was better suited for little hands. Although I know the syrup presents a problem.
As a mom of two, I will tell you, the little syrup cups next year would be appreciated versus the big bowl of syrup that my daughter is scooping onto her French toast stick and now has a syrup pool to play with.
So we found that getting feedback before the guests left was essential. It takes just a minute while the event is still fresh in their mind, and the less people actually have to write down, the more that they can either tell you or just check a box, the better your results will be. Maybe using a Likert scale to assess attendee satisfaction is a really quick way to get through this. If there are clear if there are clear objectives for the event, then assessment is actually fairly easy. SurveyMonkey works. We've had good success with it in the department, or just appointing one person to ask each guest as they leave, will you be back next year, is probably one of the easiest ways to go. Yeah. Leeanne, what's your tip?
So they know my tip because it speaks to me, and it's from Kristen Schultz, who is the Director of Communication at the Orioles. And this is the idea that sometimes you need to fight your practicality to ensure your vision. You need to take risks. I'm a very practical person. I like to write textbooks and checklists, and I do like talking about the why, but I'm not necessarily the person. When it comes to the creativity chapter, we talk about don't say you're not creative. And I'm like, that's me, I'm not creative. But they always tell me, like, you can't say that. You got to fight your practicality. And when I was teaching the event planning class, the university came to me and said, I think it would be helpful if we had some type of an event in the spring that is very similar to homecoming in the fall. And I looked at them and thought, what? Like, that's a huge event. Like, do you not realize how many people we have at the table when we plan homecoming? Now we want to have something in the spring, and it's just my class working on this. And the class is so excited. They're, like, we have all of these ideas, and I'm going, I'm starting to sweat and going, this is a lot. Like, I'm not sure we can do all this. This is, you know, we have to order this stuff. We gotta on day one start. So as I talk to my class, you know, we're developing logos and talking about ideas and how we're gonna have this spring homecoming. The idea of how can we get the alums to come back? It's not homecoming, but it's something fun. And they said, you know, what would be cool is, you know, if all the faculty come and some of the coaches come and we have a dunk tank. And I knew where this was going, but I also said, no, that's probably not a good idea. Well, in reality, it was a really good idea because once we stuck the faculty up into the dunk tank and we put coaches and prominent people in the dunk tank, it became sort of the success of the spring homecoming. It was the idea that we were doing something fun, we were doing something different, people knew it was going to happen, so people showed up to see it. And at first, my practicality was all over that. No one's going to sign up. What is the liability? We have to sign contracts. Where are we going to find this dunk tank? What if people get hurt? And yes, we took all of that into consideration. We did what we needed to do, but we also did something that was never done at our university. I mean, we did the whipped cream pies in the face, not a full dunk tank. And when we did the dunk tank, that's what made it a success. So those are some of our tips. What we'd like to do now is we have about a little less than 15 minutes, maybe around 10 minutes. We want to be able to address some of your questions out there. So Ryan, did we get any questions?
Yeah, there's quite a few. Thanks for the presentation. First one, Chip, I think you had talked about guest lectures. You have guest lectures come in when you teach the course. Do you have any ideas of who you've used in the past, what positions they had, that sort of thing?
Oh gosh, we have had, the course has probably been taught for 6 or 7 times now. Mm-hmm. And depending upon who's teaching it, they tend to get people that they are working with or that they know from their professional life.
So when I taught the course, I pulled in 3 of our alums who went into the event planning industry. And this was before we even had a class in event planning. So we pulled them in. We also had a class where we pulled in a florist. We knew someone to just talk about what is it like to work with an event planner. I'm trying to think.
I know Julie had a lot of connections that
Yeah.
she was pulling in people she had worked with in the past who do event planning. A couple of the people that worked with us at the Orioles ended up going out and working specifically in events. So they would come in and talk to the class. So we used a lot of our connections of people that we knew or worked with or students. So that's a really good start to try to find some people.
And it also helps with our internship coordinators, the people that we have doing our internships, they'll say, well, we know someone that's doing something. So for example, we have someone working for WVAL and she's a prominent person and she'll say, I need an event, and she'll come in and talk to our class and then pitch them an idea for them to do. In October, we have like Pumpkin Fest. And she came into class, she pitched the event and said, this is what I'm interested in. Can you help? And we let the students decide if that's an event that they want to do.
This past year, we've had a teacher who has connections to the racing industry. And so we had the planning team for Pimlico Stakes come in and talk to his class about the many problems facing planning the Pimlico Stakes in a space that is challenging, to say the least. Mm-hmm. He was also involved with the opening of the Pendry Hotel in downtown Baltimore, and so we had their event planners come in. So I would say all of us are relying on the people that we are familiar with or our alums as well.
Great. Besides the dunk tank, Leeanne, what is the biggest difficulty the 3 of you have encountered when teaching this course?
I think one of the hardest part is a lot of students say, I want to be an event planner, and they come into the class and they don't realize how much work it is. So when we sit down to actually plan an event, the students want to go straight to the fun part of the event. and they don't realize how much planning we actually have to do until we get to the event.
I will say that last year's ECA,
Yes.
right? Was that where you're going?
Mm-hmm.
Last year's ECA event in Pittsburgh, we brought 8 students. We brought 8 students. They were funny because they, at the end of each day, said, wow, event planning's a lot of work. And it was a really good, immersive way for them to see what was happening. And I think
really
they learned a lot. Yeah.
So I think the hardest part is helping them understand the planning process. When I do, so I'm the president of the Eastern Communication Association, and I've been working on this for 2 years now. And the students are like, well, what have you been doing for 2 years? I'm like, well, there's hotel contracts that I have to do. I'm coming up with ideas. I'm brainstorming logos. And Stephanie, with one of her classes, I went in and talked to them, and we worked on doing invitations and stuff. And they're like, this is not till March. And I'm going, yes, and I'm nervous because it is already October. And they're like, that's so far away. I'm like, no, it's not. It's right around the corner.
And that class did a lot of work for ECA, and those students were the ones who got to actually go because there was so much planning that went into that course.
I think another difficulty that we see with our students from time to time is they get very emotionally invested in the event. Mm-hmm. And so if there is a weather delay, I'm thinking of the color run. They're just thrown. And if something goes wrong during the event, they take it very personally. And so we have to teach them ways to sort of disengage their emotions from the planning of the event. And that's not something we really have to teach anywhere else. While it's a good thing for them to really be vested in what they're doing, it's also hard when things go wrong. We want them to learn from when things go wrong rather than feel like they failed.
Right. And I just want to add one more thing. We talked about the budget chapter being so important, but when I talk about budgets and I say something like we have $100,000 to do this because it's an outside client and they're giving money and we're working on this, like they think it's so much money, but we also do stuff for the university where we're giving $400, and they seem like, oh, it's only $400. You can do a lot for $400. You don't need a $100,000 budget. Most of the time, you're going to get $250. How can you stretch your money? How can you make that work? And as soon as that we say, like when we found out how much we had for the Spring Fest, people were like, oh, well, we can't do this. What are we going to do? I'm like, this is a big budget. I mean, a lot of times you don't get this. So that's something for them that when they read the budget chapter and they think of numbers, they don't necessarily interpret the numbers correctly yet.
Great, thank you so much. And a reminder, if you still do have questions, the portal's still open, so go ahead and ask. One other question that I have right now is, how hard is it to adopt this approach? This textbook, this approach to teaching the course, how difficult is it?
So, go ahead.
Not too difficult. Not too difficult. We have the text. We have the, all the case studies are in the text. All those tips are in the text. The tips are great discussion points. Like you can have your students say, you know, you can ask them what's their favorite tip from the chapter, and it spawns some really good conversation. We also have PowerPoints that we develop that are already ready to go if you were to teach the course. The test bank is in there.
Discussion questions.
Yeah, and we have discussion questions and activities at the end of each chapter. So those are already built into the text.
And we also created a movie list that we did because a lot of times you want to show a clip of something, and that's what we did. You know, we said, here's some movies, here's some clips that you could show in class of when things go wrong and when they go right.
We should have it.
Yeah. So, what else you got for us, Ryan?
So, you've given advice from your colleagues. What advice would you give to future event planners?
That this is a process, right? And I tell my students this all the time. When we go through the textbook and we go through all the chapters and we talk about listening and we talk about conflict and, we're going over the PowerPoints, I'm showing them things. There's a learning curve here. It takes a while. You just don't start on day one planning an event. And that's what happened, I think, a little bit with me in ECA. In 2010, when Janie came to me, my first response was, yes, of course, we can plan this event. And then these two are like, hold on, do you know what you just agreed to? I'm like, yeah, it'll be fine. So I've been the learner in the process too. So I really started to understand. And now after a couple years of teaching the course, I can say that I'm comfortable, but I'm still anxious in moments planning an event. And that's a good thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's a good thing to have all of that practice and preparation and have the students see you doing that.
I would tell the students to know themselves. This is not advice that's specific to event planning, but they have to know what they can do well. If they are detail-oriented people, and they know that, that's great. If they're not, then they also have to know that and know that they have to rely on someone else, ask questions of someone else. So a lot of self-knowledge in this industry will really help you build a team and find success without deluding yourself that you're going to do it all.
Right.
I would also add to that I think the best event planners are good listeners. Sometimes it's very easy to say, I want this event to be this way, but unless you have done it before or have seen the negatives and the positive of doing it, you have to really hear that client and understand what that client wants, because your way may not be what the client's vision is. And your job as an event planner is to deliver what the client wants, even if sometimes you may not agree with it. So being open to listening and, not always trying to drive the bus, but, having people help you out with that's really important, I think. And some of our students have a vision and they go, this is how we want this to be, but you really have to figure out how it's all going to come together and work.
And what I like about the book is our connection to the why. Like, why do you do the things that you do? And there's a lot of how in event planning. How do you do this? How do you do that? How do you do that? And a lot of times students forget the why. And another piece of advice would be to know the why. Like, why are you doing the things that you are doing to make this event successful? We spend a lot of time on that, right? You have to know why. And that comes from the listening, that comes from the learning, that comes from this being a process.
Thank you. One last question. I know time is really short. We had a attendee ask, are you aware of any event planning communities online?
We had a couple. There's some in the book, I think.
Yeah, there's some listed. And what is the one that's in Maryland that we went to?
There are the community colleges in Maryland, particularly Howard Community College has a really strong event planning base, and there are chapters of different, we should know them by name, but there are lots of chapters of different event planning, not just organizations, but certification organizations as well.
I think it was in one of the chapters.
Yeah. So one of the chapters, I know we do list some of the organizations in which you can go to where they offer insights for you as an event planner. And what we tried to do when we were doing sort of the appendix was, sort of break things out from many of those resources that we looked up. So what does an actual event budget expense sheet look like? So we created an expense sheet. We created sort of the diagram that shows you, like, here are your tables, here are your seating patterns, and many of them have the interactive, like, move things around. A lot of that is more accessible now. But what we can do is we can look in here and then we can send you some of the information, some of the websites that we use when we teach the course.
That is a perfect segue. Thank you so much. All the attendees will be getting recording this webinar. In addition, you'll get email addresses for the 3 presenters today. And if you have any additional questions, please reach out to me or the 3 experts. And I look forward to it. I thank you for your presentation today. Had a lot of fun.
We would like to also, one of the things that we're doing, it's going to be a while before we get to our 2nd edition. We're working on it now, and we're engaging people in the community and having them figure out what we want additional case studies to be. But we're also looking for tips. So there's no guarantee, but if you have tips that we didn't talk about, or if you read the book and you're like, oh wait, you're missing this tip, this is so important, send it to us. And that way we can sort of put it in our thought pattern as we consider new ideas for the 2nd edition.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to the attendees.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
Alrighty.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.